Welcome to the Network Conversations. I'm Bill Yates, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Cliff Grossner, who's VP Market Intelligence and Innovation at the Open Compute Project. It's great to have you with us, Cliff.
Well, thank you, Bill. I'm honored to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. So you're going to join us in London in December for the Layer123 World Congress. Can you give an overview of what you're planning to talk about when you're there?
Yes, of course. I think one of the things that people probably already know about the Open Compute Project is that we work very closely with the hyperscalers, and our mission is to take innovations that are brought to market or brought to light by the hyperscale community. We foster that community along with a number of vendors, and then have those innovations embedded into product that can be consumed by everyone. And so I'm going to be talking about some of the latest innovations that are coming down the pipe because of the learnings of the hyperscalers operating at scale that obviously will filter into the telecommunications networks as well. And there's a number of very important advances that are being worked on. One is looking at how do we create certain standardizations and modularity in equipment, especially important as we move from a cloud-based environment to an edge-based computing environment. And now we want to have standardized modules and equipment that is used from the centralized cloud out to the edge. Give you some examples. One of the things we're working on is looking at AI modules, and we know that AI components or silicon is not only going to be in the cloud, it's also going to need to be at the edge. And so that standardization is going to be very, very important. We also have to think a lot about security. And actually, at our summit next week, we're going to have a big announcement around security rooted around the hardware root of trust. It's really important when a device boots up, no matter where it is, at the edge or in the data center, that we can prove that the software that's being loaded is exactly the right software and nothing else, and isn't being spoofed. So there's some important work being done there. It turns out that as we move equipment to the edge, it's no longer acceptable to have root of trust done by separate silicon elements. We need to embed silicon root of trust elements right in the silicon itself, in the SoCs, in the CPUs, in the GPUs. So something that we're going to be talking about next week at Summit. Another very important area is around specialized silicon. So if we go back a couple of years, many people had the idea that I can just buy 50 of the same servers and I'm done. I'm good. It's all in software. But we've now shown that that's not true, that there are workloads like AI and ML that require very specific computational structures, and therefore you need specialized silicon in order to deliver that. And it turns out that when you want to build specialized silicon, for example, for doing a particular type of AI ML computation, about 70% of the silicon in a particular integrated circuit is common across the circuits. So you would like to reuse those. And so now what we've seen is a technology called chiplets being developed, where we no longer build one monolithic die and put it in an integrated circuit. We now have smaller dies that are stitched together to create an integrated circuit with interconnect. So in fact, we've now got networking on the chip itself. And then we get to reuse certain components. And what the OCP has been working on is to actually create an open market where now, instead of buying an integrated circuit, there will be companies that will buy chiplets, and they will assemble them, be a system integrator of circuits, and then they will go into systems. And that allows for very specific specializations, but also a lot of economics, because we reuse components. And also it turns out that not all the components have to be of the most expensive processes. And so when we start to look at telecommunications, and we start to look at the switches, and we start to look at the computational platforms that are going to be put near cell site towers or in other places, we're going to start to see this technology be embedded in it, coming from the marketplace that's being enabled by the Open Compute project, working with the hyperscale partners. The other area that we're very heavily investing in is sustainability. And in this case, it's real. We know that the current environmental impact of computation cannot be sustained. So there's no choice. We have to do something. And what we are also going to be talking about at Summit, and what I'm going to bring to the Layer123 conference in December, is some of the latest initiatives around sustainability, new metrics for understanding the the efficiency of IT components or IT equipment, not just building equipment. And we'll be looking at new ways to design for reuse and recycle, so that we see a way to take modules and have them standardized across servers or other equipment, and have the modules reused across generations of equipment, and the designs reused across generations. So there's a lot. And also the other elements we're starting to look at is in the building of buildings themselves, and the carbon impact of concrete and steel, and what are the other materials that can be used when we put together a data center or point of presence, and look at that entire envelope in terms of how do we reduce the environmental impact of computation. And one last element that we've been looking at is starting to integrate a set of APIs between data center hardware and the software layer. And so we can imagine a world where the Kubernetes scheduler is actually getting information from the computational hardware about its environmental profile, and making decisions about where to run certain software based upon minimizing the impact of its impact on the environment versus simply performance. And I don't want to imply that it's always a performance versus environmental impact. Sometimes there are ways to, in fact, achieve both. So some of the latest really interesting things that are coming around the computational side, and that leads to the discussion about 6G, because we're all curious about what is that going to bring to us. And we're also looking at 6G as a way to enable the metaverse or omniverse, depending upon who you talk to, where now we're working on really building a truly immersive experience for people. But we know that's not going to be achieved without a significant deployment of specialized equipment at edge computing sites close to where the people are, and taking advantage of the low latency capabilities and the architecture of 5G and 6G around the user plane. So those are things that we're also looking very closely at. And one of the other things that people may not realize is that we have had a lot of work at the OCP from Nokia and others like MyTech and WeWin to build what is the open design for our Open Edge server. And that server is designed to actually sit in a small environment, a ruggedized environment, and provide the computation that we're going to need for 5G and 6G.
Well, that's lots of really interesting points you've raised there. I just wanted to drill down on one of them, which is the sustainability part. There's, as you say, a real business imperative to do it, purely because, as you say, it's not sustainable to keep going the way we're going. From your point of view, how do you see the business imperative as it's being driven by the telcos, specifically at that C level? Do you feel like the urgency is there at that level? And if so, what do you think is leading to that?
Well, ultimately, I think that the urgency is now being felt everywhere, because the consumer is starting to look at the behavior of the corporations they're buying from. And so when that happens, of course, the C-level has to respond. That's their job. And then when sustainability becomes part of the buying decision, that's when we are at the right place. And I think that's starting to happen now. But also the understanding that you can have sustainability as part of the buying decision without losing performance. There's ways to do both if we're creative. Let me give you a good example. One of the projects that we're looking at the OCP is revolving around liquid cooling, whether that's immersion or circulation of a dielectric fluid to cool equipment. And by the way, don't think that's only in big data centers. Liquid cooling has to come to the edge, looking at the heat profile of GPUs and cooling servers even at the edge. And so with that, then comes the potential that you have heated liquid. And we now have projects that are looking at heat reuse, where the actual heated liquid is pumped to other places where it's used to heat buildings, for example. And so there's some examples. There's some ideas that are now being prototyped and actually built that will change the sustainability profile of the data centers and computational infrastructure. So it'll give you an idea of how we can move from thinking about it to doing it.
That's fascinating. So speaking more generally now, there are a lot of things that are being done at this level which telcos can learn from and implement in their operations. What do you think are the main things or the main factors that might stop them doing that in the near future? Are there any barriers, whether they're technological, organizational, cultural, that need to be overcome to make this happen?
Well, I don't think, I mean, the technological barriers are the same for everybody. And many of the members of our community are telecom providers. And just like the data center operators that have to operate at scale, so do the telecom providers. And they also have to operate without interruption. It's just as noticeable today if one of the data center operators is at a service as if one of the telecom providers is at a service. And so I don't think it's a technological issue that's specialized for telecom. I think the areas that'll potentially be barriers to overcome are the ones that we've always faced in telecom, is that the ability to operationalize things takes a little bit longer because of the culture. Doesn't mean we don't get there. We have already very many examples around NFV and how long that took to percolate into the community and be widely deployed. And I think that'll make it go a little bit slower. But also I think we're past a lot of those kind of barriers, as well as telecommunications providers have been reorganizing over the years. And we're seeing a new type of telecom provider. The other thing I would point to is that the relationship between the cloud provider and the telecom provider is now changing, and they're becoming more partners in many ways. So once that happens, the crossover between the cultures will accelerate. And I think that will be a good thing for the planet, for sure.
Yeah, we were talking to Dan Pitt recently on this series, and he just described it as co-competition, which we quite liked.
It was a word that, honestly, that was the word that was on my tongue before I said cooperation, but I did not use it.
Okay.
Yes, I know Dan pretty well, so I understand his point of view for sure.
Yeah. So finally, in general terms, again, you're going to be joining us in London for the Congress. Aside from the topics which you're covering, which you've just gone into for us, what are the main questions across the industry that you're looking for, not necessarily an answer to, but maybe the start of an answer? What are the burning issues you want to go into more detail on?
For sure. So certainly as I meet with the telecom providers, the operators, and their vendors, I'm going to be looking for use cases, because to me, that's always important. What is the next set of use cases that are coming down the road? How should I be thinking about the OCP community? And how can the OCP community help with innovative designs, new best practices, blueprints? Also working with our alliance partners. As you are maybe aware, we work very closely with TIP and the Linux Foundation. And so we'll be looking to work with our alliance partners to see what we can do to be part of or be a catalyst for the next generation of infrastructure, computational infrastructure and telecommunication infrastructure that will be used by the telecom operators.
That's fantastic. Well, we're definitely looking forward to hearing about that and more. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us, Cliff, and we'll see you in London, and hopefully we'll see everyone watching in London as well from the 5th to 7th of December at the QE2 Centre, right in the centre of London. So we're going to see you there at the Layer123 World Congress, hopefully. Thank you so much, Cliff.
Oh yes, I'm definitely looking forward to it, and we'll have a few people from our group as well there. So we'll be there in force.
That's fantastic. Thank you.